Thank you so much for having me, Ernest. Well, the key word for my journey is curiosity. And we actually talked about that in the pre-show. Following your curiosity. So I live in Houston, Texas, but I don't sound like it because I grew up in New York City. So yes, Upper West Side girl. I moved to Houston to go to Rice University, and we have a saying around these parts that owls don't leave the nest. So here I am after more years than I would like to admit since graduation. And I have just been someone who has followed my curiosity. And I found that if I follow my interest and I tug on those threads, something amazing always happens. The universe has presented some incredible opportunities to me through just serendipity. So I went to university thinking I was going to go to law school. That's the family business. I was going to go be a lawyer like my dad. And yeah, that plan changed. I've also realized that most of my grand plans change, and they always seem to change for the better. So yeah, I didn't go to law school. I ended up in my first job in international tax of all things at Arthur Andersen, right before Andersen collapsed under the weight of the Enron scandal. I then, again, serendipity, I became a nonprofit finance executive. I found myself back in public accounting after that. I found myself as an investment banker. I was back in public accounting again. I've owned my own consulting firm. I've been a partner in the Big Four. And then, most recently, in the last few years, I had the opportunity to really follow my curiosity into tech. First, in an ed tech startup, leading product and strategy, and now working independently as an advisor, as a board director, primarily with companies on what we would call the bleeding edge of tech. And all along there, I managed to pick up an MBA in operations and supply chain management. And then I followed a passion that was ignited during my MBA for organizational and social psychology. I took my first psychology course as part of my MBA. And the professor was incredibly inspiring. He may have even been on the podcast. You may even know him, Dr. John Reed. And ah, yes, in large part, I owe my career to Dr. Reed. It was his inspiration as part of the course that I took in my MBA, and then just his mentorship and friendship afterwards to this day. And that was what propelled me ultimately. I mean, it took me another 10 almost 15 years to go do it. But that's really what set me on the path to get my PhD in organizational leadership psychology and just weave these threads together. So I spent a lot of time tugging on threads and then a lot of time weaving them together. And what I found is that at the center of all of it is people. And you said that as part of my introduction. But technology is built by people. People innovate, people build tech, and they build the tech to serve people. And so people are at the heart of everything that we do. They're at the heart of everything that we make and create and innovate. And there's no one in the building who understands how to center humans better than those who spend their time studying the behavior of humans. And so the natural relationship between psychology, particularly when you think about people in groups and organizations, so social and organizational psychology, the relationship between that and technology, it is peas and carrots, as they would say. So it's a very natural fit, and one that people often find surprising. But to me, it comes back to the human centered nature of both. And psychology is about understanding people so that we can help people to be better people. And psychology and technology is about creating and innovating ways to empower people to do that which they didn't necessarily believe was possible before. And that's what technology has given us, whether that technology is the wheel or it's Web3. Well, maybe the best way to do that, and I am a teacher as well. I've faculty at the Chicago school, so I often find that with my students, the best way to do it is a case study. Let's just do a live example. So I had the opportunity to work with a new company in the blockchain space, starting early last year. And I give a ton of credit to the CEO. He is young and visionary and energetic. And he recognized that community is a critical part of success in Web3. And when I talk about Web3, shorthand for where the internet is going now. So, Web 1 was basically the military created the internet, the government. Web 2 was corporations got in on the deal. And now Web 3 is peer to peer. It's figuring out how we take advantage of all of this distributed computing power that we have. The example I cite most frequently is my washing machine that likes to text me when it's done with a cycle, as well as sing a little song. But my washing machine has an incredible amount of computing power. In fact, in 1969, it might even have been able to put a man on the moon. So when we think about how much computing power is idle, frankly, and could be tapped into, and then what if we connected all of that? And then what if we gave people a way to like monetize their idle computing power? What would that do in terms of restoring control to people over their data, providing greater access, creating more opportunity, supporting entrepreneurship? I mean, the opportunities are incredible. So when we think about Web3, um, one of the things that's most important because it's largely driven by open source software, and it's distributed, it's peer to peer. That means community is a huge part of it. It means you need to build a community around your brand, around your product. And frankly, that's been true in Web 2. That's frankly true in the analog world. Communities raise up brands. And so I credit the CEO for recognizing very early on that he needed to get a pulse on the community that was growing up around this new brand, around this new company, and understand, who are these folks? Because in the Web3 world, community grows largely on social media platforms, whether that is X, formerly known as Twitter, it's in a Discord server, that's Telegram, that's where the communities are growing up. And so whereas before you might be able to, go and see people in person, in this case you're looking at virtual communities. People are all remote. Oftentimes they don't even use their real name. You only know someone through their screen name. And they have an opportunity to represent themselves through an avatar that may in no way resemble what they appear to be in person. You are spot on. And so when I think about what this opportunity was, the CEO said, I need to understand this community. And in particular, here are the things I need to understand. I need to understand who they are. I need to understand what's important to them. And I need to understand how they want to work and what they need to be most successful. That's culture and that's values. And when we think about traditional organizations, we think of mission statements and vision statements and, well, what's the company culture? The same is true in this bleeding edge of technology. The same is true in Web3. In fact, I might even argue that it's even more important because you don't have people co-located with one another. When we, thinking back to our kind of social psych theory, like, well, what are the things that create affinity bonds between people? Well, proximity is a big one. Exactly. So the CEO and I had a conversation about how can we go about learning the emerging culture and values of this community. And I said, well, psychology gives us some wonderful methodologies that we can use. And in particular, there's this whole area known as participative inquiry, right? So we've got phenomenology, we've got ethnography, narrative, case study, grounded theory, participative inquiry. And within participative inquiry, right, we can thank Kurt Lewin for action research, which is great, but problem focused. It's all about we've got an issue and we're going to iterate on it till we solve it. Starting where you're looking through the lens of we have a problem isn't the framing that we wanted. Instead, we wanted a framing that was, what's the best of us? Who are we at our best? Who do we aspire to be when we're firing on all cylinders? That gets you to appreciative inquiry. And so I said, how about we do this? How about we try to do an appreciative inquiry in a completely distributed, completely virtual first, no in-person interaction. Let's do an appreciative inquiry. Let's find out what this community believes it looks like at its best. What is its positive core? And one of the reasons that stood out to me is because Web3 generally has a host of negative stereotypes associated with it, whether it is the crypto bros, whether it is financial scandals that are plastered across the news. It's seen as sort of this meme wasteland, and there's not necessarily an understanding or appreciation of how it could apply in the mainstream, or that there could be space within Web3 for people who consider themselves more traditional users of technology. Where do I fit? And what I loved about starting with appreciative inquiry and the first step in appreciative inquiry, mapping the positive core, is that it comes at things from an incredibly optimistic, positive perspective. It says, who are we at our best? Yes. And so I worked with our community manager, the company's community manager, who I knew only by his screen name. We were only able to communicate over text message because my first language and his first language are not the same, and his English is a lot better than my speaking and writing of his native language. And so we worked together to figure out an appropriate survey instrument. Okay, what kinds of questionnaires can we put out there? How can we incentivize people to participate? How do we do this ethically? Now, we know that in order to join the community, you have to indicate that you're over the age of 18, and there are certain parameters within the system that control who's able to access it. But we really wanted to make sure that people understood, were informed, and were truly actively consenting to engaging in this, because this is a form of research. And so it was important to us to be ethical. It does. And then take it a step further. I'm concerned about, well, is there anyone who's potentially vulnerable, who we would be engaging with in doing this work? And it's known and well documented that there are many people in the technology industry arena, particularly in software development and coding, who are neuroatypical. And so for people who are neurodiverse, we want to make sure that we're being sensitive and thoughtful about what we're communicating, what we're asking, how we're asking it, and be thinking about how do we engage people where they are in a way that is not dominated by one particular culture, right? This didn't need to be Captain America, as you just pointed out. When also thinking about Web3, as I was studying the literature, I came across several articles that piqued my interest when it comes to understanding the participants, in the research and the studies and the work that we do. Um, Oftentimes in our journal publications, there is a great desire to have detailed demographic information, and I understand why. I mean, it's completely understandable that we are sitting on a bedrock of literature that has over-indexed for years, on straight white men. And when we get into the realm of Web3, a lot of the research looked at how the ability to represent oneself through an avatar and a screen name, um, allowed people to present an online picture of themselves that better reflected who they know themselves to be, more so than they might be able to in person in their communities. And this is particularly true for the GLBTQIA plus community. It's very true in the trans community. Exactly. Exactly. So, in a place where it may not be safe for someone to present themselves as their true and authentic self because they are trans, the online environment allows that, and particularly one, um, in Web3, which is much more focused on peer to peer, the decentralization, which also gives people a sense that their data is not going to one central service that could turn it over to, say, a hostile government or law enforcement, or make it public in a way that could put them in jeopardy. And so it emerged that we have this richness within this community. We already could see just in the Discord server, I mean, something like 47 plus languages represented, so many different countries, nationalities. Um, and it was a mixture of ages. Some people chose to self-identify, but again, we don't have a way to validate that. So it was a question of how are we looking to group people? Are we looking to give them boxes to check, or are we looking for them to tell us who they are? So it was a really incredible exercise to go through, and then to put out these questionnaires into the ether, into cyberspace, and I was blown away by the responses. I really didn't expect that this online community, of primarily developers and designers and artists and some entrepreneurs, that they would spend time with 25 different questions that required text responses, but they did. Yes, and trust is a transactional concept. Trust is what makes up the difference between what I have seen you do before and what you are promising to do now. When When people simply engage from the outset, it strikes me that it may be more to do with relating. Relating involves empathy. It involves points of commonality. It involves an extension or a measure of grace. You can make a mistake and come back from it. So I think that there's this interesting alchemy in these communities because you have a lot of people who are there because it isn't the mainstream. It's a lot of underdogs. It's a lot of people who don't always feel like they fit. So what I loved about engaging with this community and seeing their engagement was that this gave them an opportunity to have their voice heard. And when it often feels like the internet is very corporatized, it's driven by algorithms, our data does not feel like it is our own. When people feel that their voice matters, that they have a voice, man, they use it. So what came back was incredibly refreshing to me and inspiring and surprising. One of the questions asked was, what does this community do at its best? And several of the responses were ask questions like these. And I was blown away because it was an example to me of how people want to engage. And the answers were very meaningful. What was particularly interesting to me were when I got into questions that were asking about what skills the community members felt were most important to be successful, both technically and interpersonally. And about 50% of the answers to the question, what's the most important technical skill to be successful, were actually in interpersonal skills. Communication, problem solving, open-mindedness. It came down to growth mindset, coaching, relationships, communication, people. It's all people. Yes, Soylent Green is people. It's all people. It's all people. Mhm. Always. And so what I love about the project that I did, and I'm still working very closely with this company, is just how really human centered it is, which is astonishing to think about in a highly technical area. I mean, we're talking about making technology to build the next kind of technology. I mean, it is it's exciting because you really are at the frontier, and you're also dealing with the most age old things imaginable: people and their feelings. People. And I think that is such an important element of Web3, right? Web3 gives people, it's empowering. I mean, anybody can get out and build. Um, it really breaks down so many barriers that exist in the technical world. So what I really appreciated as well, and I think you just said it without saying it, is also how beautiful a home it makes for psychology and business. Because again, it is all people, and we are the people. We know people. We know people. We know human behavior. We know human behavior. We are the people. And what I love about this is that there is so much space, room, opportunity, need for psychology, both as scholar and practitioner in this space, because we are all constantly learning and we're constantly practicing. And the opportunity really to engage and take our age old theories. I mean, there truly is nothing new under the sun. But when I mean, day to day, working with a company, engaging with the community online, now getting to go to events and meeting members of the community in person, um, and really seeing how the things that we study and we learn about and then we put into practice, how incredibly applicable they are. And I think about this frequently, especially in a software development space. There's this brilliant and beautiful theory that I have several pet theories, as my students will tell you. One of them is the concept of felt understanding, because it's so meta, literally. Um, as the psychologists know, felt understanding is my perception of your perception of me. It's what I think you think about me, and how that influences my behavior towards you. And oh no, exactly. And because it's my perception, it is my reality. So I have projected it onto you, whether or not it has any truth for you. You're like, no, I never thought that. And I'm like, oh no, you did. Because I am so convinced over here, right? Because my own little narrative's going. I'm like, oh my gosh, he thinks this. At which point, it is my reality. And then when you don't do that thing, I'm like, but here's the script. So when when we're in startups in particular, and you have a really small team, and you've got, it's astonishing how quickly like factions will form, how quickly people all of a sudden build up these huge narratives about what this other person thinks and what they would do if they knew. And it's like, actually, number one, they don't care because they're really too busy thinking about themselves. And two, you made that all up in your head. Maybe try asking. And so there's so many opportunities for us as psychologists to bring what we see in brick and mortar organizations, to bring what we see every day, and what we know from our education, into these spaces that seem so high tech and cutting edge. And as we've said, this whole conversation are really just people. They're just people with cooler tools and newer toys. The best way to find me is the good old Web2 solution, LinkedIn. I'm very findable on LinkedIn. I'm easily contactable through LinkedIn, and you can follow my circuitous, nonlinear career journey from my LinkedIn page. So it's a great place to find me. Whew. All right. Well, I'm always chock full of advice, and as this advice is free, it's worth exactly what y'all are paying for it. The first thing I would say is, oh my goodness, just ask. I see a lot of business leaders. In fact, I was on a call as recently as a few hours ago, where people were trying to figure out, well, but how's the market going to react to this? How's our community? How's our stakeholders going to react to this? I'm like, well, we could just ask them. You can just ask. So we have this, we oftentimes will hang on to things under the belief that if we just worked on them a little bit harder, they'd be like super perfect. And then we can release it out into the wild. Um, Ask. Ask for feedback, ask for insight, ask for help. People want to help. Give them an opportunity. It's a gift. But yes, ask. You don't have to know everything. And not only knowing what to ask, that's good. But oh my goodness, just making the effort to ask. So, point number one, free advice number one, ask. Free advice. Mhm. And the second piece of advice is one that I share frequently, um, which is embrace being seen trying. In the in the open source world, so when you think about open source software, it's an incredibly courageous thing to do. You write your code and then you just put it out there, and people are going to find all sorts of problems with it. Some folks are going to fork it and go make it better. And it is something where everything you do, your successes, the events where you fail, it's all public. And it is a remarkable act of courage to be seen trying in public. It is also incredibly liberating because it goes back to what I just mentioned: ask. That's what trying in public is. It's asking for help, it's asking for support. And that's what builds a community around you. People get to see you trying, and it's inspiring because when you see someone trying, you think maybe I can try too. So, leaders, try in public. Hmm. And that's leadership, though. But that is leadership. Leaders, to be successful, let your people see you try. Be, try, fail, try, succeed. Failure and success are events. They're not identities. It doesn't make you. It doesn't make you either one of those things. It makes you brave. Try in public. Oh, Ernest, thank you so much for having me. And thanks to your listeners for coming along on the ride.